My songs know what you did in the dark. So light 'em up, 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 light 'em up, 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 light 'em up, up, I'm on fire. So light 'em up, 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 light 'em up, 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 light 'em up, up, I'm on fire.
Yo ho everybody, and welcome to Yinzer on Hockey. Today we are going to be taking a look at the 2017 and 18 Stanley Cup playoffs. Recently the Boston Bruins and Florida Panthers played the final game of the regular season. Florida won that game and knocked Boston down to the second seed in the Atlantic Conference, the Atlantic Division. In the Eastern Conference, giving Tampa Bay the number one overall seed in the Eastern Conference. Nashville won the Western Conference and the President's Trophy, giving them home ice advantage throughout the NHL playoffs. First matchup we'll be looking at is Tampa Bay versus the New Jersey Devils. This is the only cross-divisional matchup in the entire playoffs. New Jersey won the season series 3-0-0. One of the games went to a shootout. New Jersey is led by Taylor Hall, probably leading candidate, if not a very likely candidate, for the Hart Trophy. Tampa Bay is led by their top line with Nikita Kucherov and Steven Stamkos. Goaltending matchup should be pretty interesting. Andrei Vasilevsky for Tampa, not a ton of playoff experience. He did play in the Eastern Conference Finals against Pittsburgh a couple of years ago. That game went to Game 7. He played very well in that series. He seems pretty sturdy in goal, and I think he may end up being the difference in this series because New Jersey brings a lot of speed. And Tampa's defense isn't the fleetest of foot, so Tampa may have trouble matching up with New Jersey's speed. I project this game to go probably 6 games, and I look for Tampa to win the series in 6 games and move on to the second round. Next matchup is Boston against Toronto. Maple Leafs won this series 3-1. One of those wins came in overtime. This is an interesting series depending on Boston's health. I think if Boston gets most of the players that they have currently injured back, Bergeron came back recently. I expect Rick Nash to be back before this series concludes. Their back end is very young in Boston. McAvoy, Krug, and others on that back end. Should match up well with Toronto. Toronto isn't a super fast team, but they do have a lot of talent on their front end. Mitch Marner's had an amazing year. Austin Matthews can score from pretty much anywhere. Frederik Andersen in goal for Toronto has had an amazing season. He's probably going to be a finalist for the Vezina. Boston with Tuukka Rask and Khudobin as their goaltending pair. Tuukka Rask has been a Vezina winner in the past. He has a Stanley Cup. I think experience goes to Boston here. Marchand, Bergeron, very good up front, and they'll create matchup problems for Toronto. I look for this game to go 7, and I think that the home ice to Boston will be the deciding factor. They play very well at TD Garden. First matchup on the Metropolitan bracket, Washington against Columbus. Washington won the season series 3-1. Washington has a very good forward group. They roll pretty much 4 lines, very strong on the front end. Their defense isn't as deep as it has been in years past. This is a team that probably wasn't expected to be this good following the rebuild that they went through, or the retooling they went through over the offseason. They lost a lot of veteran leadership, lost a lot of skill in their defensemen, in their defensive core. Braden Holtby hasn't been nearly as good as he's been in years past. He's consistently been a Vezina candidate in the past. He's won the Vezina in the past. And he's had his struggles this year. Philip Grubauer has played very good as the second goaltender for Washington, and curious to see, with Barry Trotz not having a contract next year, how aggressive he will be as a coach to go to his second goaltender to try and win this series. Columbus and Terry Panarin Artemi Panarin has been a sensational addition for the Blue Jackets this year, as well as Ian Cole, Thomas Vanek at the trade deadline, both added some veteran depth and leadership that Columbus may have been lacking in the past. Bobrovsky is one of the best goaltenders year in and year out, always in conversation as one of the league's top goaltending performers. Columbus is yet to win a playoff series in their existence. I think there's a moment of inevitability when they do get their first. This seems to be the better matchup that they could have had. They have not matched up well with Pittsburgh in years past. They seem to like this matchup against Washington, almost to a point where it looked like Tortorella kind of threw the game just to get this matchup. And I'll leave that as speculation. I have no insight on that, but it looked kind of skeptical. Anyway, I think that this series is probably the 2 most evenly matched teams, I think, in all of the playoffs. And I think Columbus is going to win this series in 6 games. I think that the lack of defensive depth and goaltending will probably be the downfall of the Washington Capitals. The other matchup in the Metropolitan is Pittsburgh against Philadelphia. Pittsburgh won the season series 4-0. 2 of those games went to overtime. Pittsburgh scored 5 goals in each of those games. And that may be the difference in this series. Pittsburgh's got firepower from pretty much all 4 lines. Their center depth is probably unmatched in the league as far as 1 through 4 center icemen. Their defense hasn't been great. Letang hasn't had the best year, but he tends to perform pretty well in the playoffs. Matt Murray won the Stanley Cup twice in his rookie year. And I think that his experience in the playoffs, as far as goaltending goes, that might be the difference. These are 2 pretty evenly matched goaltenders with Brian Elliott. I suspect Brian Elliott will get the early nod in the series, and Matt Murray. I look for this to be a more physical series than some might suspect, because these 2 teams, they always play a physical brand of hockey, even with their speed and skill. And I think that there will be a lot of special teams play because of that physicality And in that regard, I give Pittsburgh the edge, having the top-rated power play against Philadelphia, who had the 29th rated penalty kill. And I look for that to be the edge. I think Pittsburgh wins this series in 5. In the Western Conference, in the Central bracket, you have the President Trophy winning Nashville Predators against possibly the second biggest surprise story of 2017-18, the Colorado Avalanche. I think last year they had 58 points total. This year they finished with, I think, 96 or 97. Got the second wild card. Regular season, Predators won the season series 4-0, with one of those games going to overtime. The Predators have the best defensive depth in the NHL. That's not a knock on anybody else. That's just obvious analysis. Their top 4 defensemen could be number 1 defenseman on any other team. And I think that defensive depth and their playoff experience, being in the Stanley Cup Finals last year, will give Nashville the edge. I think this series goes 5 games, but I'm going to take Nashville in 5. The next matchup in the Central bracket, the Winnipeg Jets against the Minnesota Wild. A week ago, I would have pegged this as the most entertaining and must-watch hockey series in the playoffs. These are 2 very evenly matched teams, top to bottom, as far as depth, goaltending, defense, special teams, everything. They all seem to, they line up line for line. But with the recent news that Ryan Suter